I'd like to present this evening's moderator. His name is Ray Young. He's a facilitator for organizations and individuals, teaching them how to creatively identify their problems and then generate ideas on how to solve them. He's asked to MC and be speaker at lots of events, and he's also an announcer on Erin Radio. Ray Young, I'm passing it over to him.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you for your introduction, and welcome everybody to this debate, and special welcome to the candidates for coming as well. The first thing I want to do is a land acknowledgement. We respectfully recognize that this land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples. We honor their stewardship, and I ask that we commit ourselves to the ongoing process of reconciliation and learning about our shared histories. We support the continued conversation between all peoples to find truth, reconciliation, and justice now and in the future. The debate organizers, first of all, this debate is part of the National 100 Debates Project. It is strictly nonpartisan, an initiative focused on bringing voters together at the riding level to hear candidates' best policy proposals for the environment. You can refer to 100debates.ca. If there were 100 candidates, that would be a problem. The local organizer is Climate Change Action Dufferin-Caledon group, and for more information about them, you can go to climatechangeactiondc.org. Now, at this public event, photos and video are being taken for broadcast, and we have notices up about that. You should read them, because if you're here, you basically are giving your approval to being photographed. So welcome again to the candidates. And in order for everyone at this event to be safe and for it to be inclusive to all, we're setting some community ground rules, and these two are posted. These are rules of decorum. We want to make sure that there is absolutely no hate speech or personal attacks. I do not anticipate this will happen. Respect for one another is absolutely essential, and we don't want, or at least we want to ensure that everyone has a chance to hear their candidates' positions, especially as we have a lot of material to cover in a limited amount of time. Now, the structure of the debate is going to be such that each candidate will have 1 minute to do an individual introduction presentation, and that will be followed by 4 100 Debates national type questions. That will be followed by a couple of local questions from Climate Change Action Dufferin-Caledon, and then we're going to be turning the questioning over to you. And in that regard, we have a couple of runners who will pick up your questions from you. There are cards with writing implements so you can write your questions down, and those questions will be selected randomly to be given to me to be read to the candidates. And there are our runners right over there. Hold up your hands, girls. All right, thank you very much for being here. So the candidates will be asked to stick strictly to the time limits that we have given them. The prepared questions that we have are going to be projected at the front to my right and to my left, so you can see them and remind yourselves about what is being asked. Once again, the location of the washrooms is downstairs, but we ask that you leave by this door to my right at the front of the hall. Exits, if we need them, and we've already had one false fire alarm here tonight, are behind me, of course, and off to right and left at the rear of the venue. So we'll start right now with the candidates giving their initial remarks, and the order of speaking has been chosen at random. First up, we have Allison Brown. She is with the New Democratic Party. And Allison, you're on the clock.
Bonsoir, mesdames, bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Je m'appelle Allison Brown. On se bat pour vous. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Allison Brown, and I'm in this for you. I am a registered nurse and have served my community by taking care, having the privilege of caring for many people. This opportunity to serve has transitioned into the political realm where I'm willing to serve the community of Dufferin-Caledon. The other reason I'm running is because of my parents. They've sacrificed a lot being immigrants to this country, and this is a testament to running for all those who have sacrificed for others so that others can do better. Finally, I'm running because there are so many issues around climate change, small business issues, etc., and I want to represent Dufferin-Caledon for that.
Next we have Chad Ransom of the People's Party of Canada.
My name is Chad Ransom. I'm representing the People's Party of Canada. A lot of you are probably wondering what I'm doing here tonight. I'm here tonight because I'm a concerned citizen. During these debates, it's sort of been a little bit of a history lesson, being in the cafeteria of ODSS or in this very hall where I was christened and my children were christened. I love this county, I love this country, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes, even if it goes against party policy, to make sure that everyone is taken care of and all your needs are met.
Next, we have from the Liberal Party, Michelle Fisher.
Hi, I'm Michelle Fisher. My neighbors in Melville call me the Green Liberal. I was a part of Camp Citizens Against the Melville Pit early on when I moved to Caledon, working actively to take the case to the OMB to help protect our water. I have a long-time commitment to environmental issues, and I would not be running for the Liberals if I didn't believe they had the same commitment. In the summer, I had the opportunity to speak directly with Catherine McKenna, the Environment Minister, and I'm convinced that we have an ambitious and serious plan for the environment. In our record, we've done more for the environment than any other previous government, especially on the topic of climate change, and there's much, much more to be done. And I'm really hoping to be a part of that change. It's something that I feel very strongly inside me. I'm very passionate about it, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you here tonight. Thank you.
Now we will hear from Kyle Seaback, who is representing the Conservative Party.
Yes, I'm Kyle Seaback. I'm the Conservative candidate here in Dufferin-Caledon. I want to leave a cleaner and greener planet for my children, just like all of us who are here today. I'm proud of the Conservative Party's policy document on the environment and climate change. If you haven't had a chance, you should take the time to look at it. It's got a website all of its own, arealplan.ca. It's right here. It is a 60-page document. It is based on 3 things. 1, green technology, not taxes. 2, a cleaner and greener natural environment. And 3, taking the climate change fight globally. In this now, I'm going to talk about globally. Canada is 1.6% of global emissions. Even if we reach our Paris Accord targets, which we aren't under the current Liberal plan, that's what the Parliamentary Budget Officer said, it won't solve the problem because big countries constantly are increasing their greenhouse gas emissions. We have to get them on side.
Thank you. And now we will hear from Stefan Wiesen of the Green Party.
Thank you. A quick show of hands. Who believes in the room that climate crisis is the most important issue at this election? Show of hands. Thank you very much. Second question, that will be the last. Who is happy that there are just 2 Greens in Ottawa and just 1 Green in our Ontario Parliament? Who is happy with that situation? Thank you. I'll get back to this later. Thanks for having a climate debate. That's the debate where it's a make or break for the Green Party. We have an extremely comprehensive plan. It's called Mission Possible. It's 20 points of different activities I will introduce you to. And I will also prove that it's lack of political willpower of the old line parties that have prevented us to make any progress when it comes to climate change.
Thank you. So we will now move on to the national questions, and the first one concerns climate change. These should be projected up behind me. I hope you can read them, but I'm certainly going to read it to you. Around the world, we are seeing inspiring examples of leadership to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and accelerate the shift to a green economy. At the same time, we are seeing a ramp-up of the effects of climate change, and the scientific consensus is that we have little more than a decade to turn things around. We see extreme weather events across the country, including wildfires, flooding, and droughts. These are causing anxiety and worry, given their enormous financial and environmental impact. Per person, Canadians produce the most greenhouse gas pollution of all G20 industrialized nations, nearly 3 times the G20 average and over 20 tons per person. What are the key elements of an action plan that you will advocate for to ensure Canada meets its international obligations to reduce greenhouse gas pollution? And we will start again with Chad.
Okay.
Did I get that wrong?
No, you got it right. I thought we were starting with Allison. Fair enough. So my party doesn't have a policy whenever it comes to the climate. I am a big believer in climate change. I am a big, passionate person whenever it comes to the environment, but I do not believe in climate alarmism. I believe we do have more time than 10 years in order to fix the problem. In order to fix that problem with a time span that's a little bit greater than most, I would like to see Canadian technologies be developed and to be put onto the world market. The biggest thing I'd like to see with people is education. I have a lot of people telling me that I'm not green, that go home to big houses heated by natural gas in their big cars. I would like to see people practicing what they preach whenever it comes to the climate. It comes down to the R ratings in your house, how much heat you can actually develop by changing your windows. And I do think the government should be helping out with rebates to help everybody at home make sure their own home is greener first. Thank you.
And now, Michelle, please.
The good news is, through the Liberals' initiatives over the last 4 years, we are 3/4 of the way there to reaching our Paris Accord agreements. So we have 11 years to reach the last 25%. Some of the things that the Liberals have planned, first of all, net zero emissions by 2050, legally binding 5-year milestones so that every future government's feet will be held to the fire on this. We're going to plant 2 billion trees over the next 10 years as a natural drawdown system for carbon. We're putting infrastructure in place to make it easier for Canadians to transition to electric vehicles and take public transit that's powered by electricity rather than oil and gas. We're giving incentives to businesses to innovate in clean tech by cutting their corporate tax rates in half if they manufacture and distribute clean technology products. And finally, we're going to ban single-use plastics as early as 2021. And this is all great news for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll now continue with Kyle Seaback. Kyle.
Thanks. It was actually the Conservative government that set the Paris Climate Change Accords, where we agreed to reduce greenhouse gases by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. The Liberal Party originally criticized those targets as being too weak, and when they became the government, they then adopted them. The interesting thing is the Parliamentary Budget Officer, who is an independent officer of Parliament, has stated very clearly, Canada will not reach its climate change commitments under the plan that's been put forward by the Liberals. He is a non-partisan officer of Parliament. Our plan, like I discussed, is 3 things. Number 1, and investment in green technology. There is exciting technological developments that are taking place right now with respect to carbon capture, carbon conversion. 20% of global climate emissions are steel. Right now, there's companies that are investing in technologies that will eliminate carbon emissions in the production of steel. We are proposing a green patent credit that will reduce the tax rate to 5% on income that is generated from green technology and patented in Canada. This will stimulate our innovators, our investors, to try and create these green technologies that will dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're also going to take a sector-by-sector regulatory approach with the big emitters, because the big emitters are the ones that are significantly increasing carbon emissions in Canada. The Liberal plan does not require big emitters to reduce taxes, reduce carbon emissions. All they have to do is pay a carbon tax or buy carbon credits elsewhere. It's not going to get us where we need to go. Finally, we need a cleaner and greener natural environment. We want to conserve and protect our land, water, air, and wildlife. And finally, we want to take this global. China is increasing their carbon emissions significantly every month. And if we do not get the big emitters on side, we cannot save the planet.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. And now for his 2 minutes, Stefan Wiesen of the Green Party.
Did you say 2 hours?
I may have misspoke.
I mentioned that we have Mission Possible, our 20-point climate action plan. I would like to highlight a few points which I particularly recommend with highest priority. Let's establish an inner cabinet of all parties in Ottawa. Stop the bickering, stop the back and forth. Government A comes, government B comes, unravels, government C, you know what I'm talking about. We need, for this crisis, all hands on deck. I'm not suggesting we abolish democracy. Just for this specific issue, it has to be multi-partisan. It cannot be a partisan issue. Number two, we have to be really stringent on the targets. I mean, numbers have been flying around the room. The Greens say 60% greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 in 11 years compared to 2005 standards, and being zero carbon by 2050. And I appreciate that the Liberal Party has taken on our green goal. Assume leadership. Carl, I agree with you 100%. Other countries, I mean, we cannot expect every country to have leadership about climate change. And Canada, indeed, is not the biggest emitter in the world. In our introduction, we mentioned that we are big emitters relatively to population and relatively to our peers. However, leadership is what I love about this country. We have to take the leadership. And if we miss our targets, if we struggle with missing our targets, where is the famous Canadian leadership, which we have shown in peacekeeping and other measures? So that's very, very important to get other countries on board through leadership. Last but not least, as an example, green the grid. Our electrical grid would benefit from better east-west transmissions so that clean energy can flow, let's say, from Quebec to Ontario and all across the country. That would be a huge investment, and we are all in favor of implementing this right away.
Thank you, Stefan. Our last speaker on this particular question for the New Democratic Party, Allison Brown.
Thank you, Ray. The NDP has put forward a bold $15 billion climate change plan that confronts the climate crisis. It limits warming to 1.5 degrees and creates 300,000 good jobs. The plan includes major investments in low-carbon transportation infrastructure, like public transit, rail, and ferries. But it also helps families afford zero-emission vehicles through much more generous tax credits that actually grow if you buy a vehicle made in Canada, which will help ensure good jobs, building the vehicles for the future to stay right here in Canada. It also includes help for families to install charging stations at home and investments to expand charging station infrastructure across the country. It also includes an ambitious building retrofit program that I think will make a huge difference in the lives of people in Dufferin-Caledon. Homeowners will be able to access no-interest loans to undergo energy efficiency projects in their homes. This will not only lower emissions and make homes more comfortable, but it will create thousands of jobs in the skilled trades and supporting industries and save families on average $900 a year in utility costs. Dufferin-Caledon has probably seen, like the nation has seen, some of the negative impacts of climate change, extreme weather events, and are becoming more common and more damaging. Flooding has been a major problem. Our plan includes expanding federal funding to $2.5 billion to respond to disasters, as well as working with communities to proactively adapt their infrastructure to withstand extreme weather events like flood proofing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a quick reminder to our audience that if you have any questions, write them down. We've got runners who will pick them up and we can add them to our pile. The second national question we have concerns water. Many Canadians know that our country has the longest coastline in the world. Less well known is that Canada is home to roughly half of the world's lakes and roughly 10% of the world's wetlands. Canada is seeing the impact that industrial development and climate change is having on our water resources. We are seeing the reemergence of pollution hotspots like Lake Erie. And the Insurance Bureau of Canada notes that since the 1970s, there has been a massive 250% increase in natural disasters, including floods and droughts, that are likely related to climate change. What can the federal government do to work with different sectors like municipalities and farmers to reduce both water pollution and the risk of flood events which have been aggravated by industrial development and climate change? And I hope it's not a surprise to our panelists that I'm starting with Michelle.
Thank you. We haven't had our share of natural disasters like other places have, but who can forget that image of somebody canoeing downtown line when we had the flooding a year and a half ago? Some of the things that we're doing is we've introduced a $2 billion disaster mitigation and adaptation fund, and we've added $1 billion to that in our platform to help communities prepare for climate change through more resilient infrastructure. We have also put in a chemicals management plan with regulations being prepared to limit toxic chemicals like BPA from getting into Canada's freshwater reserves. We've invested $8.95 million to support 36 projects under the Great Lakes Protection Initiative, preventing toxic algae and reducing the release of harmful chemicals. And we have also been working with municipalities through infrastructure funding to upgrade wastewater treatment facilities. I know that this issue is of particular concern up in Shelburne, but it's also of concern here as well, to help keep our waterways clean and pollution-free. We've set up a new nature climate fund to work with farmers and municipalities to store carbon and protect biodiversity while supporting our economy at the same time. Those are a few of the things that Liberals are doing to better protect our water supply and mitigate against climate change disasters. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We now go on to Kyle Seaback.
So a Conservative government will want to protect our waterways, first of all. We want to support and maintain watershed protection, including Great Lakes. We want to protect our wetlands because wetlands do a whole bunch of things. They protect us from floods and droughts. They recharge our groundwater, purify our water. They provide important habitat for fish and wildlife, and they offer opportunities for recreation, and in addition, they sequester carbon. We want to lead a science-based terrestrial and marine conservation assessment to identify the best opportunities for expanding our protected area network, parks, marine, migratory bird sanctuaries, national wildlife areas. We also want to continue the Canadian wetlands inventory. Finally, we want to consult with Indigenous peoples to explore options for their more active participation in the management of protected areas. I also want to talk about two specific things. Number one, we're not going to allow our waterways to be used as toxic dumping grounds. A few years ago, you're going to recall that the current government allowed the City of Montreal to dump 500 billion liters of raw sewage into the St. Lawrence River. That is not maintaining our waterways. We will work with our municipalities to end all raw sewage dumps into marine and freshwater ecosystems. Secondly, in 2007, a Conservative government put forward and implemented the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund. It funded over 200 community-based projects that restored fish, wildlife populations, planted thousands of trees, and reduced harmful sewage and waste dumps into the watershed. This program was canceled in 2017 by the Liberal government. We will restore the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we continue with Stefan.
I like everything Michelle and Carl have said. Great initiatives. But these are our main political parties who have shared power here and there for many, many years. Why now? Why not years ago? Let me tell you a water story, which comes right off our community. There's a company called Exogen. And I know the owner, I know what they're doing. They are providing equipment that purifies industrial discharge into our waters in the Great Lakes. I double-checked this morning because I couldn't believe it when I heard it first 6 years ago. It is okay to discharge industrial waste into our waters. You pay a fine, you discharge, you pay a fine, you discharge, you pay a fine. And the equipment made right here locally is available to clear these waters. It's the lack of political willpower to force companies to use equipment by local companies like Exogen to use this equipment rather than paying a fine. That clearly shows. And that's our green plan. The green plan is economically sound. It's fiscally responsible. Let's create more jobs, local jobs, through innovative companies that fight climate change. And governments have failed by enforcing good legislation and only talking about it. Second failure is on farmers. Our farmers have, in large numbers, transferred their farms to industrial conglomerates. Fiscally, that has been very interesting for the farmers because from a fiscal perspective, it's tax-wise better to sell than to pass on to the next generation. That's a massive failure that we can, through tax law, reverse and rather help farmers to transition to the next generation, where young farmers have ideas, regenerative farming, soil regeneration, using measures to bring farming back where it was before.
Thank you, Stefan. Next, we will hear from Allison Brown.
Thank you. We know that we have to do better as a country. We'll recognize Canadians' right to a healthy environment by enshrining in law and create a federal environmental bill of rights to make sure that everybody can enjoy clean water, air, and land. We'll create a national freshwater strategy, work with the provinces and territories to protect waterways and restore navigable waters, protecting the, To tackle increasingly common floods, we'll work with communities all over Canada to make sure that they have the resources they need to manage disasters. We will empower local leaders with the right tools to adapt to climate change and protect families and businesses from new weather extremes. That means putting federal adaptation funding on a long-term track that reflects the scale of our challenge. Investing in resilience now, from flood mitigation to wildfire breaks, shoreline stabilization, and enhancing natural infrastructure, avoids steeper costs later. Improving Canada's flood maps is an urgent necessity, and building municipal capacity to assess and respond to climate risks is key to identifying the most cost-effective resiliency projects over the coming decades. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. We're going to move on to our third national question now. Whoops, sorry, we're going to move on to Chad. Now I remember you.
So again, with these being my personal policies, not a policy of the party, I stuck with more of a local incentive. This is headwaters. The majority of Ontario gets their water from our area because of where we're at in relation to the sea level. You have the Grand River to the west, and you have the Humber to the east. These need to be protected. Common sense, we shouldn't be dumping raw sewage and toxic materials into our waterways. That's just common sense. I don't want to see places like Nestle coming in and taking our water rights. It's unbelievable. We need to protect our waters from corporations that want to misuse it and abuse it just to take advantage of the environment. Whenever we discourage these companies from taking our water rights, it would stop the big quarry in Melancton, because they need to grab a pipeline to bring it right down from the lake in order to make it work. If you guys are looking for a way to stop that gravel pit, protect the water. Whenever it comes to the wetlands, there's a lot of wetlands that are on private property right now. What I'd like to see is a rebate on your property taxes, because we all know we pay too much here in Dufferin. If you have a percentage of your own property, that is wetland. Keeping private owners responsible for the wetlands, which would not be the responsibility of the government. Again, it's all about personal responsibility. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chad. And I hope the video is in color because my face is bright red. Now we'll go on to question 3. Wilderness conservation. When asked about what they love most about our country, Canadians often point to natural beauty, wildlife, and spectacular wilderness areas. Yet we are falling below our international commitments to protect these spaces, and our parks and other protected areas are not funded at the level needed to conserve the diverse plants and animals that live here. A recent study shows that 50% of Canadian wildlife species are in decline. 87% of Canadians value the emotional and physical benefits of spending time in nature. However, 82% say that they're concerned that future generations won't have close or easy access to nature. What will you do to protect the quality and quantity of wilderness in Canada? And if I've got it right, we're starting with Kyle.
You got it.
Good.
I grew up enjoying time in the wild and in the wilderness. My family took lots of trips camping, enjoying our national parks. We have to absolutely find ways to conserve and preserve them. One of the first things that our government would do is lead a science-based terrestrial and marine conservation assessment. I know I mentioned this before, I'm going to say it again. We want to identify the best opportunities for expanding our protected areas, parks, marine protected areas, migratory bird sanctuaries, national wildlife areas. This is a critical project that we have to engage in to make sure we can do that. We also want to restore funding to the National Wetland Conservation Fund. These are fundings that have been removed. We want to protect migratory birds and increase resources for waterfowl conservation measures. We want to restore funding for the community-led National Wetland Conservation Fund, which was canceled recently. We want to restore funding for a community-led recreational fisheries conservation partnership program, which was also canceled. We want to create a new fund for community-based projects targeted to enhance wildlife. We anticipate this would cost $25 million over 5 years. We also want to maintain the community-led habitat stewardship program for species at risk, because communities are the people who are best able to help us preserve our wild environment. We want to maintain important conservation programs, including the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, the National Heritage Conservation Program. That's the steps we're going to take to protect and conserve our wilderness. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now continue with Stefan.
As much as I have pledged not to politicize the climate crisis, we are politicizing that issue as well. We have in Canada already, and let me read it, all these are complicated names, we have already the Endangered Wildlife in Canada Scientists Association. These are the scientists who decide about what species is endangered, yes or no. But they cannot declare a species endangered. Only the federal cabinet can do that. Why not listen to the scientists? That makes no sense. Another failure. Certainly the Greens want to renew the Environmental Farm Protection Plan. I spoke a little bit about it before to enhance especially farmers who want to go back to regenerative soil practices. That is also good for our wildlife. Use less fertilizers, less pesticides. We all know, for instance, with bees, the pollinators are in a crisis. So better farming practices will certainly help with our species not to become extinct. And what would be new with the Greens? We want to establish a biodiversity conservation plan for all of Canada. So take it a little bit out of provincial jurisdiction and have a plan for the whole country to conserve the biodiversity we have.
Thank you very much, and we'll start again with Allison.
Thanks, Ray. The world's biodiversity, our plants and animals, is declining at alarming rates because of climate change and the destruction of our natural habitats. We need to act now to preserve and begin restoring our natural habitats and wildlife before it's too late. One of the most important things we can begin doing is protecting more of our land, waters, and oceans so that our natural habitats and wildlife can begin to heal. This is why we're committed to protecting at least 30% of our land, fresh waters, and oceans by 2030, backed by funding and enforcement. Working with other levels of government to develop a system of urban national park support, conservation, and to preserve our natural heritage. Developing a national approach to tree planting using responsible reforestation to help lower our carbon footprint. Support the creation of Indigenous managed protected areas to make sure that species recovery efforts uphold Indigenous rights and embrace traditional knowledge to increase biodiversity. And we would expand marine protected areas to protect ocean biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll continue with Chad.
First off, we need to balance the budget so we have enough money to deal with all of this stuff. Whenever it comes to the environment, I was really disappointed in the Ministry of Environment. I called them in the summertime, telling them I had the biggest colony of brown bats, which was an endangered species living in my house. I was getting rid of them, and I wanted some help with some bat boxes. I was told, do not phone us until you find a dead one. I would like to see an initiative with the Ministry of Environment on concentrating on why we have healthy colonies of animals and what is being done to make sure that they do survive whenever they are endangered, instead of focusing on what's killing them. Not one of these had the white noise, which is a fungal disease that kills most of the brown bats that are out there. With my party, we believe in you. We believe in personal responsibility. So again, I would like to see the tax credit for environmental property be lowered from the 10 acres that it's at right now to about 4 acres. If you have 4 acres of unused treed or wildflowered property, I would like to see you guys get a reduction in your property taxes, encouraging farmers, encouraging people who live on the land not to be just cutting their grasses or using pesticides, but to let the wildflowers grow to help out our pollinators. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will proceed with Michelle, please.
Okay. Quite often I hear from people, all you Liberals do is institute carbon pricing, and that is absolutely not true. So when the Liberals came to power, only 1% of our oceans in 2015 were protected, and today that's just over 14%. We invested $1.3 billion in protecting biodiversity, and this puts us on track to meet our international commitment to protect our wilderness spaces. For 2020, this target is 10% for marine and 17% for terrestrial. We have an even more ambitious plan, which is to protect and conserve 25% of Canada's land and 25% of our oceans by the year 2025. In addition, we have an abundance, we have a richness of wilderness space, or at least hiking space and beautiful forests and trails in this area. Not everybody has that. If we want to have our kids protect nature in the future, we need to make sure they're experiencing it. So the Liberals are expanding their Learn to Camp program, which will give 400,000 children every single year an opportunity to learn basic camping skills, and give 75,000 low-income families an opportunity to come to one of Canada's provincial or national parks so that they can experience that as well with their children. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And now we continue with question 4. This concerns pollution and toxic substances. Canada has made big strides to improve our health and environment by regulating toxic substances. Legal limits on lead in gasoline, restricting chemicals like DDT and ozone-depleting substances, the Canada-US Acid Rain Agreement, and the phase-out of coal-fired electricity have had an enormous impact on our well-being by saving lives, preventing illnesses, and saving billions of dollars in avoided healthcare costs. However, air pollution is still a leading cause of death and illness in Canada. In addition, our laws and regulations have not kept pace with emerging threats from newer toxic substances in our environment, including from pesticides in our food and other harmful chemicals in everyday consumer products. Many of these substances have demonstrated links to cancer, genetic damage, developmental problems, chronic illness, and many other health effects. These effects are often more severe for children and other vulnerable populations. Our overarching toxic law, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, has not been significantly strengthened in 20 years. What will you do to ensure that Canadians are better protected from health and environmental impacts of toxic substances? And will you commit to strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and the Pest Control Products Act? And we'll start now with Stefan, the Green Party.
Yes, I'm running the risk now of being the broken record, where the needle sticks on the turntable. Most of you are proper age, still know how vinyl works. Not being sarcastic, thanks, Kyle, for pointing out of some regulations that were implemented under conservative governments, which the Liberals have dismantled. I did not know that. Thanks for pointing this out. While at the same time, a conservative government in Ontario is dismantling environmental protection that the Liberals have implemented. And that's the thing. It is the token of inter-party bickering. The environment cannot be token of that. I do this, you do this, I don't do this. That is the root cause of the problem. Specifically on toxins, we want to reverse the burden of proof. Anybody who provides a chemical to agriculture, food, or personal care, the proof has to be reversed. Rather than our agencies proving that the substance is toxic and damaging people, the planet, plants, the company who releases a new product has to prove that this product is indeed healthy and not harmful. So that would be revolutionary, but that's the only solution we can have to this problem. Obviously my education is in business administration, economy, and banking, so I love the Green Party being fiscally responsible. That gets me really excited, because all these ideas eventually have to be financed. So if you look at these toxic issues, many people get sick. The savings in our healthcare systems will go into tens of billions of dollars if we did not have these toxic issues. So it's not only a health problem, an environmental problem, it's also a financial problem. Again, a holistic approach that the Green Party provides will tackle this issue radically.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And now for the New Democratic Party, Allison Brown.
The point of our environmental protection law is to prevent harm to the environment and to people. If it's not doing one of those things, we've got to strengthen it. It's true that our laws and regulations aren't keeping pace with changes in the industry. The law hasn't been significantly updated since 1999, despite being reviewed every 5 years. Canadians are still widely exposed to harmful substances like BPA in countless consumer products like water bottles and cans. We'll act to better protect Canadians from toxic substances in everyday products by strengthening the Canadian Environmental Protection Act and other legislation. We'll also reduce exposure to substances common in plastic products by banning single-use plastics. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And Chad, we'd like to hear from you.
So with the People's Party of Canada, we want to lower the corporate tax rate to 10%. What you guys are thinking right now is, what does this have to do with the environment? It's going to mean that companies are going to be able to be more profitable in our area. One hand washes the other. This will allow us to strengthen the Environmental Act if they want to do business with us. One of the things that I do want to do is open Canada up for business, but it's going to be on our terms and nobody else's. Whenever it comes to air pollution, I would like to incentivize people to be clean as opposed to punishing them for driving fossil fuels. I'm not a big believer in the carbon tax. I would like to see an incentivization for the people that do drive hybrids, that do drive diesel cars, or anything that would lower their emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. And Michelle, would you take the floor, please?
So the quick answer is that yes, we have committed to introducing a bill to reform the Environmental Protection Act, and to do that as soon as possible. We have also committed to eliminating coal by 2030. The provincial Liberals did this here, so we don't have coal now. We phased that out. But that's not true across the country. This is going to lead to a major reduction in mercury emissions, which is a toxic substance, obviously, in our air. Our plan to ban single-use plastics will mean less microplastics in our water sources and our food systems, and that's nothing but good news for us. And in the last term, the Liberals banned the import, sale, use, and export of asbestos. And if you say, well, that's about time, I completely agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last on this subject is Kyle.
What I talked about earlier is investments in technology, and a lot of the toxins and pollutants that are going into our environment can be helped with technology. For example, talking about coal-fired electricity plants. There's a new technology called a bioreactor that's been developed, and what it does is algae will absorb 400 times more CO2 emissions than trees do. So what you can do is you can attach a bioreactor to a coal-fired electricity plant, and all CO2 emissions are going to go into the bioreactor. The algae is going to grow. The algae can be harvested into biofuels and other technologies. These are the kinds of things we want to invest in. With respect to emissions that are going into our environment, we want to set standards for major emitters that will not only lower greenhouse gas emissions, but will also lower particulates and other things that are going into the environment. We are going to develop a Green Investment Standards Certificate, a program that will require all companies with facilities falling under this regulation to report not only their CO2 emissions, but other emissions, so that we can make sure that they're maintaining their standards. We believe that technology and regulation is the best way to get companies to reduce harmful emissions into the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That completes the set of 4 national questions now that we're done. And we're going to move on to our local questions. And the first one, short and sweet. What are your 3 top initiatives that you would work to get implemented to mitigate and/or reverse climate change, and why? And we will start once again with Allison.
Okay, thank you. So number 1, I would ensure that the resources are there when the needs arise. Ensuring that resources are there as we transition into alleviating global temperatures is going to help the municipalities and provinces to be accommodated with the climate change results that occur. Number 2, keeping the global temperature at 1.5 degrees Celsius, which would be an offshoot of reducing Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. So in that order, those would be the priorities that I would put forth under our NDP party. NDP. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. We'll continue with Chad.
Number one, I'd like to see initiatives for cleaner living, again with rebates, allowing people to upgrade their homes to a higher R rating. I'd like to invest in technologies that are Canadian, such as the nuclear reactors that we have. And I'd like to see a rebate for keeping 4 acres of pure land that is treed or with wildflowers for each and every resident. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chad. And Michelle, if you would, please.
Okay. My top 3, number 1, is to build the infrastructure to support electric cars and trucks and buses and trains. I was speaking to somebody at the door yesterday. He had a Tesla, and even he admitted that he got stuck without juice and had to have his car towed. I know a lot of people who would like to switch to electric cars, but they fear that they're going to go on a long trip and they're going to not have anywhere to plug in. We are committed to installing 5,000 areas for people to plug in along the Trans-Canada Highway and along major rural highways. We are also going to be investing in infrastructure with municipalities so that they can electrify their fleets of buses and public transit. And the second thing is planting trees. I know it seems like such a simple thing, but it's a natural solution to draw down carbon. It beautifies our country, it gives us shade, all sorts of benefits. And in addition to that, it's going to add 3,500 seasonal jobs for people to have and to our economy. The third thing is to invest in clean technology and green innovation. To me, this is going to help make Canada a leader in the world. I think that we can be number 1 on this, and I think we should be. I mean, I think that this is our future. We're in a major transition right now. There is a lot of innovation out there, people who are seeking funding, and we need to fund it.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll proceed with Kyle.
My 3 things are technology, and take the fight global. So on technology, I talked about this briefly in my opening. For example, steel is 20% of global carbon emissions right now. That's only going to increase with developing countries like China, India, etc., who as they modernize their economies and grow their middle class, they're going to need more steel. There are companies that are looking to produce steel with 0 carbon emissions. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is investing in one such company in the United States. Imagine if we could produce steel with no carbon emissions. 20% of global carbon emissions gone. This is why technology is so important. There's a company right now as well that's developing cement. Cement production is 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. They think they can reduce 80% of that with the technology they're developing. That's why I am so passionate about the green patent credit that will allow companies to lower their income tax on the patented technologies they develop in Canada to 5%. It is an incredible incentive. And finally, if we're going to solve this problem, it has to be taken globally. If we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to the Paris Accords, it will not solve the problem unless countries like India, China, Russia, Brazil get on side, because they are massively increasing their carbon emissions exponentially every year, and we have to get them on side. That's the way we're going to solve it.
Thank you so much, Kyle. And we will proceed now with Stefan.
Have you heard of the Sinatra test? Obviously not. But you know the song by Frank Sinatra, New York? New York, New York, don't let me sing, the room will be empty. The song goes, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. I have the reverse Sinatra test for people on the table here. Only if we can stop pipeline, fracking, and subsidies to the oil sector, Only then can we make it anywhere environmentally. So stop clapping, I'm always running out of time. The 3 points in sequence, not of the Green Party, not in sequence of Stefan Wiesen, that are the leading global climate scientists. What are the 3 biggest things we can do? Refrigerants, recycle refrigerants. We don't have time, but talk to my daughter Laura Campbell. She got stonewalled in making a research whether we do that properly here in this province. Number 2, renewables, especially wind and solar. That's the cleanest energy around. Number 3, food waste. Food waste hurts us on many levels. Again, the Green Party holistic approach, help people who are in need,
Thank
get
you,
healthier
Stefan.
yourself, and help the environment.
Thank you very much. The scientific and medical community have been predicting dangerous side effects for the environment and for human health with the installation of the new 5G network of wireless technology in Canada. Our federal government issued a statement in 2014 saying that the research on this issue had been reviewed and they saw no reason to revise Canadian safety standards, in spite of the fact that they admitted that some of the studies on wireless radiation exposure showed biological harm. How does your party feel about the installation of the 5G network? And given its potential for harm, how do you plan to safeguard human health and the environment if it is installed? For the People's Party of Canada, we'll go to Chad.
So if you've been watching the debates, every single one of us up here has promised high-speed internet. I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen the studies on 5Gs. So I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I know something that I don't. I'd have to do a little bit more research on it. It's something that I promised my constituents. So I need to do a little bit more research so I can answer that question honestly. Thank you.
And now, Michelle, if you're ready.
Thank you. I had to do a little bit of research as well. Our government's policy has not changed on 5G, but we're open to new science and new evidence in making our policy in the future. However, I did read a New York Times article today. Sorry, I just got the questions just a couple of hours before I came for the local ones. And in this New York Times article, it showed that the wide-ranging anxieties that we've had over 5G could be traced to a single scientist and a single chart that was done in the year 2000 by physicist Bill P. Curry. But experts today say that he got it wrong. When he was looking at the biological effects of electromagnetic radiation radio waves, he didn't note that they become safer at higher frequencies, not extremely high frequencies like X-rays, but high frequencies, and his analysis failed to account for the protective effect of human skin. So all of this worry when it may not even be scientifically grounded. So it's something that we definitely have to look into further and be guided by the scientific evidence and modern, recent scientific evidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Now for the Conservative Party, we'll move on to Kyle.
I think we're going to find a lot of agreement from all of us up here. I know my position is that I want to be guided by the science on this, and I think we have to make sure that this technology is safe. It's long past the time where we implement a technology and then 10 years later realize that it's harmful. So I want to be very convinced that 5G is going to be safe so that it can be rolled out across the country before I would support it. But I also want to talk about the local issue, which is cell phone towers. Now, I know this is a municipal issue, the location of cell phone towers, but I can tell you this. Often communities are very unhappy with the location of cell phone towers. I had an experience with this when I was the Member of Parliament in Brampton West. There was one of my communities that was going to have a Rogers Tower built in a church right beside with a daycare in it and homes within 20 or 30 meters. I fought extraordinarily hard to make sure that that cell phone tower was removed. I also fought hard within my party to make sure that we require cell phone providers to co-locate so they don't have cell phone towers everywhere. and they should be required to co-locate their towers together so they're not eyesores and they're not located all over the place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kyle, and we will move on to Stefan, the Green Party.
Yeah. Oh, well, I probably can make it under time. Can I bunker this for later? Again, but we politicize the issue as well. I mean, with Meng Wanzhou, the executive of Huawei, being in custody here in Canada, we all mix things up. You know, we say these are the bad Chinese, there's an issue with technology. So it's, again, a politicized issue. But I do agree with everybody on the table that science has to give us the final answer that's in line with Green Party thinking. Let the scientists say what's good, what's bad, and then have a parliamentary committee to make a final decision.
Thank you very much. And we will continue now with Allison, New Democratic Party.
So in line with everybody else, our position is that we understand some Canadians are concerned by new technologies like 5G. We believe in evidence-based policy, and we'll always act to keep people safe through appropriate regulation and legislation.
Thank you very much. Now, I know that our runners have been very busy. I see them going back and forth because it is time for our audience questions. When we start, the candidates will have 1.5 minutes to answer the question. And when we start, we'll be starting with Michelle. Oh, I get to pick? Whoa. Okay, so this one is actually addressed to Michelle. How odd is that? How do you reconcile the government's purchasing of the Trans Mountain Pipeline and plans to upgrade TMX to double its current capacity?
Sure. How many people came here in a car tonight? Right. So most of us are still reliant on oil and gas, and our economy is still reliant on oil and gas. That doesn't mean that we can't transition. It doesn't mean that we can't transition quickly, but we do need to put in the infrastructure so that we can do that. The Trans Mountain Pipeline went through an environmental assessment that showed that it was going to be safer and more efficient and less polluting than using a system of rail and trucks. So, it might surprise you to know that for every $1 that was spent on the Trans-Canada Pipeline, the Liberal government is spending $15 to combat climate change. That's something that shows where the priorities lie. Just because we're building the pipeline does not mean that we aren't concerned about the environment. We are extremely concerned about the environment, and we have a very strong plan, a realistic plan to address the economic factors to keep high-quality jobs while we transition to a clean tech economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And while that question was addressed to Michelle, I think I'm going to give the other candidates an opportunity to weigh in on the Trans Mountain Pipeline, so we'll take it away with Kyle.
Okay. Well, my answer is going to be remarkably similar to Michelle's, and I agree. We do have a carbon-based economy at this time, and we do have a need for oil and gas. So I think the decision to allow the Trans Mountain Pipeline to go ahead, the decision to expand it is going to be good for Canadian jobs, it's going to be good for workers out in Alberta, and it's going to be good for the economy. We have to find a way to marry those two concepts together. Keep the economy moving and green the economy. One of the things that we talk about in the Conservative Party is, and I said it earlier, is a sector-by-sector approach, a regulatory approach. So we want to regulate big emitters like pipelines and oil sands developments to lower their carbon emissions. And that's the way we're going to try and marry those two concepts together, and also investments in green technology that are going to help us reduce greenhouse gases in other sectors. So I'm in favor of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, in favor of its expansion.
Stefan, if you would like to comment.
You bet.
You agree, right?
Absolute hard no. Trudeau Trudeau was at a turning point in being prime minister. Do I buy this pipeline? He had to. It was the right decision because Kinder Morgan had all the assurances that the project would go forward. Kinder Morgan, the private potential operator of that pipeline, had all the rights to build it. They thought, the government thought, and then it was right. Otherwise, they would have sued the Canadian government, and that would not have been healthy. Trudeau made the right decision. And now the real right decision would have been, dear taxpayer, we made a mistake. We sunk $4.5 billion. Let's move on. That's the way he should have done it. I can explain how a pipeline works to an 8-year-old. You know, we dig for oil, it's very bad because it emits 8 times more CO2 when we dig for oil than what the Saudi Arabians would do it. We put it in a pipeline, we ship it on a boat, that boat might collide in the harbor of Vancouver, whatever happens, but the boat goes to China, they make a big fire, and they burn our oil, and then we have more CO2. The Greens don't want to shut down the oil sands operation, the bitumen production. The Greens want to keep it at level field, not to increase it, and then slowly phase it out, but no increase in oil production.
Thank you very much, Stefan. The debate pipeline now moves to Allison, if you'd like to comment.
Okay, thank you for the question. So let me just put out a disclaimer out there. This is my personal views. This is not the NDP's views. I can't reconcile purchasing of the pipeline because of the climate crisis, as well as the lack of consultation with Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, or Allison. And we'll continue with Chad. I'm sure you'll have something to say about this.
So my party does support the pipeline. That doesn't mean I do. From doing my research on renewable energy, I did find that whenever the renewable energy is not creating energy, it's going to be reliant on fossil fuels to make sure that everyone does get their energy. There's something out there called the Canapuck. It was actually developed by CN Rail. It allows the transport of fossil fuels through an already existing rail line. It actually floats if it gets dumped into the ocean, reducing the environmental impact as we switch over to cleaner energy. What I'm looking to do is use the already existing infrastructure to transfer the fossil fuels that we need to use until such time that we don't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chad. Now, the next random question that I have from the audience looks like it's directed to you, Kyle, so we're going to start with you. The Harper government removed protection from some of 3,000 Canadian lakes. How is that an indication of the Conservatives' intent to protect our lakes and water?
Well, I'm going to disagree with the premise of the question, first of all. We did a review of the act that governed navigable waters. We made some changes to those through regulations. We didn't remove all protections from waterways and lakes. And as we talked about right now in earlier, we do have a plan that we want to do to protect our waterways. I talked about it. For example, we want to continue the Lake Simcoe cleanup. That's one way that we're going to protect our waters. We want to protect our wetlands. And we also want to improve and maintain watershed protection. Making changes to regulations and in different ways doesn't mean you've removed all protections. It means that you've made changes, which we did with respect to certain regulations under the Beds of Navigable Waters Act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, I think that we'll again proceed to on the subject of the protection of our lakes and waters now with you, Stefan, if you'd care to comment.
Yeah, we touched on it before during the other question time. I don't have a new answer for you. I would think for the sake of time, let's pass it on and move on to some question that's a little bit more spicy.
Allison, is that question spicy enough for you?
It's very spicy. I'll take it.
Okay.
I'll take it. So our Canada's freshwater resources are critical for the health and well-being of our ecosystems, our communities, and our local economies. Our government will implement a national freshwater strategy and work with the province and territories to protect our waterways under international agreements. We will also reverse the harmful changes that have been previously brought on. We'll fully restore navigable water protection for all our Canadian lakes and rivers and invest in research to support freshwater protections. Thank you.
Thank you. Chad, would you care to comment?
I'd like to give you a promise that I can keep, and that promise that I'm going to keep is protecting Dufferin-Caledon's waterways. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, would you like to weigh in on the protection of waterways and water?
I echo what has been said, and I've already spoken about what the Liberals have been doing to protect freshwater lakes, and especially our Great Lakes.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I have a question here now that's for all of the candidates. And this time we'll start with the Green Party and Stefan. How do you and your party intend to support food security for all while helping farmers steward their lands in ways that sequester carbon?
Yeah, certainly that's the big balance here, right? Food security. I also see it on a global level. There's so much controversy about many things. For instance, if you look at, as an example, at GMO, genetic modification, is that still good when it comes to food security? It can do wonders, let's say, in countries like Bangladesh, for instance, which will have way more flooding and way more jeopardy for their rice harvest. So there is hybrids of rice available that can endure the weather that will come upon us thanks to climate change. So we really have to balance these things out. On the local level, we already touched on it a little bit. We want to go back to farming practices that are safer for people, safer for the environment, and actually safer for farmers, not handling these pesticides and unnatural substances. So that will give us the food security we need, and I believe that the plan of the Green Party that really here also brings all hands on decks will help us to make progress on that.
Thank you, Stefan. And now, Allison, would you care to comment on stewardship of land, sequestering carbon, and food security?
Thanks, Ray, and this is a pretty spicy one, so I'll take it. The way we grow crops, raise livestock, and use food also has an impact on our climate future and nutrition for all Canadians. We'll work to connect communities to farmers through local food hubs and develop a national food waste strategy to reduce huge amounts of food that currently go to waste in Canada. Our government will also partner with farmers and communities to support biodiversity and to monitor and protect pollinator health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. And Chad, on the table now is food security, stewardship of land, and sequestering carbon.
So with the PPC's policy on reducing the farm tax down to 10%, I'd like to see more farmers come around. We need to, in order to do that, we need to expand on a mentorship for farmers. Some of our farms are dying out just because there's not somebody to take over the land. There's nobody farming them. If you go down my street in East Gary, I see fields upon fields that sit empty with nobody growing any crops because there is no farmer to work them. I do think some incentives to allow people to get into agricultural businesses would be a big benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Michelle?
I was on the Dufferin farm tour last weekend. Did anyone else go on that? Yeah, it was pretty excellent, wasn't it? And one of the first stops was a cow farm, a dairy farm, that was extremely high-tech, very large. The last one was a small regenerative farm, Ombre. You probably have heard of it. And yeah, I bought a lot of stuff from his little farm store, and I'm healthier for it this week. Eating on the campaign trail, not always a healthy thing. And Jamie was telling me that he was at Dufferin Federation of Agriculture meeting, and he was speaking to the farmers about having a meeting between regenerative farmers and mainstream farmers so that he can exchange ideas on what to do in the face of a climate-changed world. As you know, farmers are continuously dealing with flooding, with drought in these years. That's probably not going to get better. And I think the more cross-fertilization we can have between different kinds of farms, the better it's going to be for all of us. Food security is an issue, obviously, that is going to affect us all, especially in the coming years, and especially if climate change isn't mitigated in the way that we hope. And I think that we need to work very closely with our farmers. I know that the Liberals are looking at a few different things, but we need to work closely with our farmers to make sure that we have the food available and the fresh water to feed us.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Well, Kyle, we're talking about stewardship of the land and carbon capture and, well, helping food security. Can you comment?
Absolutely. I had the opportunity to go to a board meeting with the Dufferin Federation of Agriculture and sit and talk to them about the challenges that they face. They are fantastic stewards of our environment, especially here in Dufferin-Caledon. They're very concerned about their land. They're very concerned about the quality of the food that they produce. One of the things that we talked about is the 4R Nutrient Stewardship Program, and it's a great program that has been implemented where you want to have the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place for using nutrients to grow your crops. We also want to make sure it's okay for our farmers to preserve wetlands on their farms because we know that wetlands are great for doing a number of things, including the fact that they capture carbon. Most importantly, we have to find ways to support our local family farms because the family farm is in difficult straits. What's happening is when you try and pass the family farm down, they're facing crippling capital gains taxes on the sale. They're facing incredible amounts of money that they have to bring up front. And so often what's happening is we're losing our small family farms to large factory farms and corporations. One of the things I want to do if I go to Ottawa is to fight for ways to support our local family farms so they don't have to go through these transitions and lose their farms to big corporations. Because local farmers are the ones that are going to preserve the environment on their farms.
Thank you, Kyle. We have another question from the floor, and this one is for all candidates, so we'll start again with Allison, and here's the question. We mentioned water. What about fresh water for the First Nation communities? These communities are drinking from water bottles. They do not deserve to have, do they not deserve to have access to fresh drinking water? What will your government do for these communities? Allison.
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. Our First Nations communities do deserve to have the same rights, the same access to fresh water as all the other communities across the nation. We are committed to lifting the ban or lifting the inability for First Nations communities to drink water from the tap on their own in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Chad, would you care to comment, please?
Yep. So on a side note, whenever it comes to family farms, zero capital gains tax with the PPC, just to make sure you guys understand that. If you guys were able to see Maxime Bernier, unfortunately sometimes he's not in mainstream media, you will know that he's very, very passionate about this issue. It's one of the first things that he talks about why we're helping other countries and not helping our First Nations people. The PPC will be launching out, and you can see it on their website, their policy on First Nations. We're trying to give them property rights. Right now, they can't even borrow money against their own homes. It's something that needs to be changed. It's time we bring them back into the fold, and they get the rights that every Canadian deserves, and it starts with fresh drinking water. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, we're talking about freshwater access for our Native nations.
Yeah, there's no question that we need to have clean, fresh drinking water for Indigenous peoples on reserves. Over the last 4 years, we've invested almost $2 billion in this. I understand from Corey Jones, who's the president of Negan Burnside here in town, he's part of my Rotary Club, that this is an extremely complex thing to do. So far, we've eliminated 87 long-term drinking water advisories across the country, and we pledge to do all of them by 2021. We truly believe that this is a travesty and that Indigenous peoples need to have access to fresh drinking water. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And Kyle.
I had the great privilege of serving on the Indigenous Affairs Committee for 4 years when I was a member of Parliament. I asked to be on the committee because I was interested and concerned about the issues. The Conservative government was the one who put forward the largest study and inventory of water and wastewater systems on reserve in Canadian history. They prioritized how they're going to try and remedy the situation based on the study. They determined critical, moderate danger, and safe. So we put it on the agenda that we had to categorize this and figure out what the problem is. The challenge, though, is this. Sometimes the problems are so complex on reserve that simple solutions don't work. We can all say we want better fresh water, but I'll give you an example. There was a remote reserve that was built, a water treatment facility. And as part of that, you have to train someone to maintain and work that water facility. So the community spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training some people to become certified water techs to run the water and wastewater management system. And then they got a job offer from a municipality because they could take their family off reserve into a better environment and get paid more money. So we have to find far more comprehensive solutions than just saying we're going to build new water and wastewater treatment facilities, because it won't actually solve the problem. We have to take a far more holistic approach to make sure that not only can they be built, but they can be maintained and there are healthy communities so the people that get trained stay there.
Thank you very much, Kyle. And finally, Stefan, for your comments, please.
Wow, it looks like we are talking about a new problem here. We came to Canada 26 years ago. The problem existed. And Michelle pointed out that the number of affected communities is well under 100. So here again, the political willpower has been lacking to do something about it. The old line parties was not their priority. And who created that mess? It was mining companies. So why don't we hold those responsible who created the pollution and then find a solution quickly and not sometime in the future? No matter how hard technology is, the Americans made it to the moon in a very, very short time. Nobody believed they could do it. If we have the same spirit, let's do it. Let's do it now. Help these people.
Thank you very much. And we're really fortunate to have an audience that is prolific with questions. This one's for everybody. To reduce the impact on the environment, does your party plan on shifting animal agricultural subsidies towards subsidies for more affordable fruits and vegetables with the added bonus of healthier Canadians? We'll start with Chad.
I think my party has made it pretty clear we're not into corporate subsidies at all. And that's all there is to it.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, would you like me to repeat the question, or do you want to go?
No, that's fine. I believe our government would subsidize all sorts of farms, whether they grow plants, whether they grow legumes, whether they raise animals.
Okay, thank you. Kyle?
Ditto?
I'm afraid you haven't gone over time. We'll go to Stefan now.
He wanted to reserve his time earlier, and I will give him the rest of my time.
We're all doing very well.
Thank you.
Stefan, your turn.
Yeah, the Green Party isn't the party of subsidies either. However, subsidies where subsidies are needed. If you look, for instance, the trade war with China, we have to help our farmers in the prairies who have basically zero income. I saw an interview with Elizabeth May and a farmer from the prairies. He says, I have zero zilch nada income. In such a case, the government has to help. We talked about transition from industrial farming into more traditional farming. Probably subsidies will help that transition. We can talk about farming in cities. You call that vertical farming. New technologies, extreme low carbon emissions, extremely healthy because you have a controlled environment that doesn't need any pesticides. So there's ways of improving our farming, get into a more modern and more traditional way of farming at the same time. Money is needed for that, but in general, subsidies by and large has never helped any economy.
Thank you very much. And I wonder, Allison, what is your comment on shifting animal agricultural subsidies towards subsidies for more affordable fruits and vegetables?
So thank you for the question. I apologize that I've been through our policy and I don't have a clear idea on what the position is on that policy. Thank you for whoever asked that question. It's obviously very important to you. Ray, if I can get that person's name, I will certainly contact the back office and get that answer. Is that okay? For the person that asked the question?
If the individual would like to come forward, then by all means, after the debate, I'd be happy to take your contact information for Allison.
Absolutely, thank you. And I apologize, I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, we're going to go on now to another audience question. In 2017, Prime Minister Trudeau addressed the Global Energy and Leadership Dinner in Houston and said, "No country would find 173 billion barrels of oil in the ground and just leave it there. The resource will be developed." How does this fit with the current Liberal Climate Action Plan? In actual fact, we should probably start with Michelle on this one.
I think I've already spoken to that the Prime Minister is balancing the economy with the environment and using, this is something that I haven't said yet at this point, but every dollar that comes from the Trans-Canada Pipeline is going to be invested in the climate change strategy and taking actions so that we can reach our Paris Accord agreements and reach our goal of net zero emissions by 2050. We still have an oil and gas economy. We need to transition. But I think what the Prime Minister was referring to is the fact that we have this resource, and until we have developed another one that's going to keep our economy going strong, we're unfortunately going to have to keep oil and gas going, but we are going to transition as fast as we can and as smartly as we can, because we do need to make this transition. It is the way of our future.
Thank you. Kyle, what are your comments on the lots of oil that we have in the ground?
Look, I find myself agreeing with Michelle. Look, we have to find the balance between the economy and the environment. The changes that have been made, we can't just eliminate the development of the oil sands in Alberta. People are talking about saying it, but the Alberta economy is critically structured with oil sands development in the short term. In the long term, of course, there are other ways to look at these things, but Alberta contributes a massive amount of money through equalization, through both the social transfer and then that gets put into the health transfer. So to suggest that somehow we can just completely shut down oil sands development and that won't have catastrophic effects on the economy of Alberta and therefore catastrophic effects on the rest of Canada, because Alberta is the lifeblood of the equalization program. After 18 years of Liberal government of Ontario, we ended up being a have-not province. We were not contributing to equalization. We were getting money from provinces like Newfoundland. The province that was contributing is Alberta. We have to get the balance right. We have a plan to do that. I talked about it: green technology, not taxes, a cleaner, greener environment, and taking the climate change fight global. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kyle. And I do understand that we've heard this theme before, but we'll continue with Stefan to see if you have anything more to say about all of the oil we have in the ground.
Oh, nothing comes to mind. I repeat, the Green Party once we have more influence than today, will not shut down the Alberta oil sands for the reasons given by others on the table. We don't want mass unemployment. Yes, we still need oil. We are not naive. We are not children. We are realistic politicians here. We have a clear plan. We have a clear program. But why is this also wonderful? If this is so fantastic, why are we subsidizing that sector with $3.3 billion annually? Money better spent. And one reason is that it's extremely, not only environmentally damaging, it's also extremely expensive to get oil from our oil sands. So once the world market price of oil falls below a certain threshold, I would say Alberta has to be more afraid of the world market price of oil than of the Green Party. And so it doesn't make sense, neither ecologically nor economically. Again, we don't want to shut it down tomorrow, but investing into a losing proposition seems to be bizarre. We better move forward. Alberta has a nice geographic location for wind and solar energy. Let's start moving into wind and solar in Alberta, not like Jason Kenney, who canceled the solar program for Alberta a few weeks ago.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you very much. Allison, would you like to comment on all the oil we have?
Roy, that is so spicy. I think I'm just going to refrain from commenting at this time.
All right. And the People's Party of Canada, represented by Chad.
So I think I've made my position on oil pretty straightforward, and that I'm a big promoter of nuclear. But one of my colleagues has mentioned the equalization payments. We are the only party that wants to recalculate the equalization payments. We do not think it's fair for us to be depending on Alberta to develop all of these things and extract whatever oil they need to do in order to make money to supply the rest of the country. We are actually looking to readjust on the equalization payments and make it fair for every single province. To go back to some of my, to the previous question, whenever I said no subsidies for farmers, we're a big believer in free market. Right now, the farmers, they're constricted by interprovincial barriers. They're not allowed to switch, transfer their goods from province to province. With the People's Party of Canada, we want to get rid of the interprovincial barriers to allow the goods to travel from coast to coast. Right now, some farmers ship it down to the US without even trying to keep in the domestic market. We want to open up that market, allowing our local farmers to get stronger, wealthier, and it's just a betterment for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chad. This is a question that's addressed to all parties, and we'll start again with Kyle after I've read it. Keeping in mind our spur rail lines cannot support GO trains, what is your plan to make it more environmentally friendly to commute into the GTA and reduce traffic congestion?
Well, I will say that I was not aware that our spur rail lines cannot support things. I'm unaware of that. What I do know is one of the major problems that we have with respect to GO Transit within the GTA, especially going from GTA West, is there is no two-way all-day GO. And the big problem with that is we have to widen the tracks in certain areas. Otherwise, we have problems with trains that are carrying products with trains that are carrying people. One of the things I worked very hard on when I was a member of Parliament was to get those kinds of investments into the rail lines so that we would have two-way all-day GO service going both east and west all across the GTA. I'm a big believer in transit. One of the things that we've brought forward is the Green Transit Tax Credit. It was a tax credit that we had previously implemented that allows people to claim their transit ridership fees on their taxes. I think those are the kinds of things we have to do. This is not our our government policy, but I can tell you this. We have a rail line that comes up here to Orangeville. It's owned by Orangeville. I find it unbelievable that we do not have GO train service up here. One of my long-term goals would be to try and make sure we have GO train service coming up here to Orangeville to take our commuters down and get them off the roads.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Stefan, would you like to comment, please?
Yeah, probably no surprise that the Greens are all about public transit. And it's again, it has to be done the right way. We have to offer it. A little story from my life. I worked in Paris for a while, and at the time, in the 80s, I was all for individual transport, or driving the car. That was really the thing. The only city I ever took public transit was in Paris, because it was so painful to move around by car. So, if you could convince this guy to take public transit, because pain. So we have to make it eventually even more painful to use more individual transit, and then offer the alternatives that people by themselves say, ha, click, the light bulb goes on, let's take public transit. Clearly, we can increase pain. Let's talk about congestion charges. Cities have done it successfully. Money is there, could come from measures to create a bit more pain, but we have to offer the right transit system to make it pleasant for people to use.
Thank you very much. And Allison, if you would care to comment on more environmentally friendly commuting.
Right. Thank you. So we know that quality public transit is essential to making our cities and towns run. Our municipalities are already investing in making their transit systems better and more environmentally friendly. It's time that they had a federal partner to do so. We will, as a New Democrat, modernize and expand public transit in communities across Canada and ensure that the federal transit funding flows with an emphasis on scaling up low-carbon transit projects like zero-emission buses and electric trains, with the goal of electrifying transit and other municipal fleets by 2030. Working with the provinces and municipalities that identify it as a priority, we will help build a path towards fair free transit to ease commutes, help people make ends meet, and lower emissions. At the same time, Canadians living in rural areas need affordable, convenient transit, and we'll reestablish the rural bus routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And Chad, what's your plan to make it more environmentally friendly to commute to the GTA?
Growing up in Orangeville, I've heard promises of a GO station for years and years and years and years, and I have no idea why it hasn't been done yet. I did not know that we had a problem with the two-way transit and the rail system we currently have. I would like to do a little bit more research on that. But my guess is because you guys haven't hired or elected a government strong enough to get it done. One of the things is, I grew up in this town. This is my home. I will do whatever I have to do to protect it and make it better. That is one of the things that I'd make my priority, is finally getting the GO station we've been promised, at least for the last 15 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chad. And Michelle, do you care to weigh in?
I mentioned that I live in Melville. One of my neighbors, who has lived there for some decades, remembers that back in around 1960, there was still an active rail line going through there, and a little place where people could get shelter waiting for their train. And there were a couple of people in Melville who would go to take the train. They would just step outside and wave, and the train would stop and take them into the city. You don't know how many times I've been sitting in traffic wishing that we had that service close to my home. More realistically, I dream of having GO train service and high-speed rail lines. I think that would be so good to connect us to that. I posted that recently on Facebook, and I got a response saying, well, where do you think we're going to get the $350 million to reinforce the bridges and the rail lines and build them up so that they could have higher speed trains and more traffic. But I've also heard that it costs almost $1 million per kilometer of road to pave. And we're looking at doing the Highway 413. Estimates put that at $2 to $4 billion before paying for land to be expropriated. So why can't we afford $350 million to do it? It would take federal infrastructure funding. I say let's go for it.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
No pun intended.
Thank you for your comments. So we're going to have another question from you. You're terrific. And this question has a bit of an interesting tilt to it. How will your party ensure we don't have false majority governments that do not overturn important environmental protections? And this time we'll start with, I think we're at Stefan, right? Yeah.
Okay, what do you mean by a false majority? Well, it is called electoral system. All the parties here at this table, none of them uses the first past the post system to elect for their own officers inside the party. Why are we using still an electoral system that dates back to whenever, while this really doesn't represent the will of the people? That makes absolutely no sense. And I asked you the question before, right? You all probably, I mean, if you were honest with putting your arms up or not, that we don't have enough Greens in our parliaments, right? While we are pulling well into the 2 digits here, we should have 30, 35 Greens in order after this election. And maybe we will not have that many. That is not a fair representation of the will of the people. It's a severe democratic flaw, and that needs to be fixed rather sooner than later.
Thank you. Allison, it's time for you to talk about false majorities and not overturning important environmental protections.
Truly, I did not, excuse my ignorance, because I really didn't know, honestly. I consider myself a MP in training. I'm just here as a regular person. I didn't know, please really excuse my ignorance, I didn't know false majorities existed. So the person who asked that question, you must have a specific response that you want, and I'm sorry I can't give that to you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your honesty. And Chad, we'll move on with you.
Unlike some other party leaders that say if they don't get their own way in a minority government, that they'll dissolve it. Myself, being with the PPC, I'm open to debate. And that's what it's all about. It's about compromise, and it's about talking through different issues. I've always said that I'm not willing to sacrifice the environment for the sake of the climate. Sometimes people do a little bit of strenuous ideas whenever it comes to fixing the climate. I think it's something that needs to be calculated and that is multifaceted. There's not just one way to fix it. The right way is going to come through debate and coming up with a compromise that fits all parties. Maxime Bernier, myself, and the People's Party of Canada are very big on free speech, and we will not be afraid to tackle any issue that comes our way. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle.
When the Prime Minister pulled the plug on electoral reform, and he said that Canadians don't have an appetite for proportional representation, he wasn't wrong. We have had 3 referendums in British Columbia. We had 1 referendum in Ontario. And all of them resoundingly came back saying, we want first past the post. Now, is that what I think? Not at all. I love the idea of electoral reform. I love the idea of proportional representation. I think everybody's vote should count. What this largely is a marketing challenge. Because when you give a referendum and say, hey, I know you generally like the system that we have, most people, We can either keep it that way, or you can have some form of proportional representation. Check yes or no. Okay, which form would you like? Would you like mixed member proportional representation? Would you like a blended method of proportional representation? We'll work out the details later. People will go for what they know. You know, they go for what they know. So I would love to take on the challenge, even within the Liberal government, of having another kick at the can, because I think that I would like to apply my marketing skills to developing a way to get Canadians to embrace proportional representation.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And Kyle, we'd like to hear from you.
I don't think we've ever had a government in Canada elected with a majority, a clear majority mandate, 50% plus one of the vote. That's never been done in the recorded history of Canada. I think the closest that ever happened was the 1984 election with Brian Mulroney. I forget what the Progressive Conservative Party got, but it was somewhere in the mid to high 40s. So that's been the history in this country. A lot of people talk about proportional representation, and intellectually, I think it's an interesting concept. The problem I have with proportional representation is this. How proportional representation will generally work is you get a certain number of MPs based on your percentage of the vote. Those MPs will be selected by the party leaders. If any of you have been to any of the debates that I've been at previously, I talk about the challenges of party leaders enforcing absolute party control. If you completely owe your position as a member of parliament to your leader putting you on a list, how are you going to be able to effectively advocate or represent your constituents when you are in disagreement with your party leader? I was a big proponent of the Reform Act. I worked with Michael Chong and a group of Conservative MPs to draft that and pass that piece of legislation. If I'm elected, I want to continue that trend for democratic reform, because I think the best way that we can have our parliament truly reflect the views of our citizens is if our members of parliament are empowered to actually represent them, and we take power away from the leaders' offices.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to go on to our candidate summaries, and as luck would have it, we're going to start with Allison. We had originally budgeted 2 minutes each for this. I'm cutting you down to a minute and a half. So there's a little challenge for you. Allison, if you would, when you're ready, it's ready, set, go.
Okay, well, okay, I just can't find my closing. But yeah, like I said, honestly, I'm a registered nurse. I have been for 30 years. I've served the community by caring for people, and I'll continue that caring spirit and service in the political realm. Like I said, I am an MP in training. This is a lot of new information. It is a steep, steep learning curve. I'll be represent your voice in Ottawa with honesty, integrity. What I don't know, I don't know. What I don't know, I'll ask to find out. Just a regular, everyday person that decided to put her name in the hat and to run and to represent a community that's a beautiful community. You have the Niagara Escarpment, you have the Oak Ridges Moraine, beautiful rolling hills and beautiful people. I've knocked doors, people have offered me water, asked me to come in for a while, have a drink. So it's been awesome. It's been a very interesting opportunity, and I'm here, I'm honest, I wear my heart on my shoulder, on my sleeve. So if you want to consider me as your MP, I would definitely take up the challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Chad, the floor is yours.
My name is Chad Ransom, and I represent the People's Party of Canada. I'm a hometown boy, and that's why I did this. I wanted to see a representation that will actually stand up for Dufferin-Caledon. I do not have a party whip. I am able to be a free thinker. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to come here tonight, because I know it's not easy for People's Party of Canada to be sitting in a climate debate. But I hope I've demonstrated that my passion for my home, my willingness to compromise, and my ever-ending pursuit to make Canada a better place to live is being reflected in my actions. I'm not scared to hit any obstacle that comes my way whenever it comes to my goals. And my goal is to make this country better for each and every single one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, your concluding remarks, please.
Most of us here tonight needed gas in our car to get here. We're going to need gas in our car to get home. Hopefully in 5 years, in 10 years especially, but even in 5 years under the Liberals' plan, it will be easier and more affordable for us to have other options and to go home in vehicles that don't use oil and gas. Over the last 4 years, we have done more than 50 environmental initiatives. We've put a price on pollution across the country. We're phasing out coal by 2030. We've invested in renewable energies, and we've invested in more than 1,200 public transit systems. And that's a drop in the bucket to what we're going to be doing. Moving forward towards a goal of net zero emissions by 2050, we are going to be working with a group of scientists, economists, and experts to develop plans with hard 5-year milestones that are going to be legally binding so that governments can't just keep flip-flopping and turning back the clock like we've seen in Ontario and like we've seen in Alberta. I mean, I think it took Jason Kenney less than 24 hours to reverse a lot of the environmental reforms or talk about reversing the environmental reforms on an aggressive timetable. We need to protect our environment, we need to move forward, and the Liberals have an excellent plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Kyle, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. Well, much like Chad Ransom from the People's Party, I hope I've surprised some people here tonight that the representative of the Conservative Party is here and talking about the environment. I deeply and truly care about the environment. This is the planet that my children will inherit. I think we have a good plan for climate change and cleaning and greening our environment. It is a 60-plus page document. We took real time to develop this policy. You can find it at arealplan.ca, and I invite everyone here to actually take the time and take a look at it. It's built on 3 pillars. We want green technology, not taxes. We truly believe that the key to climate change is technology. We also want to green the grid and invest in renewable energy. We want a cleaner and greener natural environment, and I talked about that. And finally, we have to take the climate change fight global. I explained it this way to my children. I said, let's say you're trying to reduce garbage and you go from 1 bag to 1.5 bag, and the next week your neighbor goes from 2 to 6. You say, oh my goodness, I have to try really hard, and you go down to 1 bag, and then your neighbor goes to 12. You're not solving the garbage crisis, because the following week your neighbor will be at 24, then 48, then 96. This is why we have to take the climate fight global. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final closing remarks are from Stefan.
Well, lots of agreement on the table. Absolutely, Carl. We are pro-technology. Everybody is in favor of transit, clean water, you name it. We had almost no controversy here at the table. Remember the Sinatra test? It was about the pipeline, the fracking, and the subsidies. All parties except one failed that test. And Allison, I checked the NDP platform. I was shocked that even the NDP fails the Sinatra test. Right? So if we really need to go to the core, to what I call the spicy stuff, and do the other things that everybody at the table proposes, fantastic, but we need to get to the core. One last word on the so-called strategic voting. For instance, if you want to vote for Michelle, Michelle is a great candidate. If you like the Liberals, if you like Trudeau, please vote Liberal. No problem with that. But if you want to vote Liberal because you don't like Doug Ford, you don't like Scheer, if that's the reason why you vote Liberal, then you are giving a reward to Justin Trudeau for not bringing about electoral reform that allows you to vote for what you really want to vote for. Well, doesn't matter. On October 21st, vote with your heart. Science has your back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can we have some applause for all of these candidates, please, for putting themselves out on a limb with you today? I want to thank the audience members for attending, for your time, for your interest, and of course, for your questions. I want to thank the candidates for participating and demonstrating their support for the environment as an important issue in the federal election. I want to thank the debate organizers, Climate Change Action Dufferin-Caledon, for their coordination. I want to thank Echo Caledon for their support. Thank you to our audience runners, Olivia and Nicole. Thank you, Dennis, for handling social media broadcast. Thanks to Josh for the sound and Warrington. Thank you, Todd Collison from Rogers Television. I want to encourage you to vote. I know you're voters. Get out there and vote. Learn more about the ethics of voting at betterballot.ca. Remember that advanced polling dates are October 11 to 14. Election day is October the 21st. Find your polling station, if you don't know where it is, at elections.ca. And quite frankly, if you don't know where your polling station is, any one of these 5 individuals will help you find it, believe me. And above all, please, please, please travel home safely. Thank you.